right, notes out.
You're using your computer?
Yeah, I got notes here.
So you, okay, so you can.
Doing all kinds of things. Here we are. Right.
Okay.
Download you. Okay, I will do a similar presentation to Annie. I'll present my conceptual framework, research questions. I will share a bit about my cases, and um, then I'll talk about my struggles in analyzing and organizing my data. Then I will try to tie up the world and share the key findings. What does the world want to know? Right now, I have, this is not dissertation, but the name of my dissertation, the title of my dissertation at the moment is Changing Technologies and Changing Ecologies, Pedagogical Technologists in Schools. So I'm dealing with technology and a particular understanding of ecology. I'll get to that in a moment. That's my conceptual framework. And then we're dealing with pedagogical technologists. Pedagogical technologists are not teachers in a traditional sense. They're not technicians. They're primarily responsible for supporting the pedagogical aspect of teaching through technology. I coined this term because the people that I study all have different job titles. But ultimately, I believe they form a category, pedagogical technologist. So I'm studying a new animal in the jungle.
A cookie monster.
Yes. So in order to study the animal, I must also study its jungle. So now I will go to what I believe in ecology is. So this is my latest iteration of a school as a complex adaptive system. What are the key parts of a school as a system? What structures a school? What are the important structures in a school? And these are the terms that I'm using right now. Organizational, where'd it go? Physical infrastructure, organizational units, meetings, and roles and information flow. I've used different terms in working with Nancy, including structures, mechanism, and foci that are grounded in other people's research. I feel like these terms for the moment are clearest to me. Hopefully they'll be clear to you. So physical infrastructure, the stuff. This includes transparent and emergent technologies. We have organizational units. A traditional school can be divided usually by grade level, maybe by content area, maths and physics. You may have other departments, administrative department, an ICT department, a professional development department, a pastoral team. So you can have organizational units in primary and secondary schools like that. There are roles. We have teachers, and we have principals and technicians. And they can be assigned to organizational units. You can be a grade 2 teacher, or you can be the English panel head, a student in grade 1. But sometimes a role can be an orphan and not belong to any particular organizational units. And people in the school, like we're doing now, meet. We have meetings. And these meetings may belong to organizational units, and they may not, because they could always be informal, water cooler kinds of things. They can have degrees of regularity and compulsion. right now we're having a meeting. And here we have some students and a supervisor. We have different roles. And we belong to the education faculty, not only the education faculty, but the ITS division. So we can kind of neatly place our meeting, and we can neatly place the interaction foci as well. What is the purpose of our meeting? The purpose of our meeting is to advance our research by sharing our research here. So, and we're here in this room. That's how I view an ecology at the moment, a school ecology, by these important units of analysis. Okay, so research questions. These are the latest iteration of research questions. Because I understand a school as an ecology, that means I understand it as a complex adaptive system. I'm not very interested in simple causality. There's just a lot of correlation. There are many, many variables at play in a school that impact change, and which change impacts. So how does a school ecology change with the presence of a pedagogical technologist? Hello. So how does this change when we have the new kid on the block? How do the meetings change, the organizational units, roles, and the physical infrastructure, and the flow of information? How do they co-evolve? So that assumes, again, that it's not simple causality. That is, the pedagogical technologist role is changing at the same time that organizational units and other roles and the flow of information and meetings are changing. How do I start answering this stuff? Well, I have a few more questions that might make answering easier. Some descriptive things. First, what does the ecology actually look like? In this school, can we map the ecology?
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
You keep on using the term organizational unit. I would prefer to use organizational structure.
Okay.
Why? What's the difference between organizational unit and organizational structure?
Unit maybe looks like or sounds like they're very static, and the structure is more dynamic and seeing inside what is happening inside.
Structure can have some connection between different units. If the units are gated, then give them only the physical units. There's no mention of any interconnection. The structure can have connection between units.
What do you think?
I had the initial idea like
Thank you.
the units isolated structures interrelated.
All right.
I would say, well, unit, I don't know whether it's dynamic. A structure may not, even a structure may not be dynamic.
Yes.
But a unit just is, to me, is a label.
Okay.
Okay, there is something, so there is a panel, there is whatever team, but then when you say a structure, then that means the unit itself has something in it, right? So other than say, okay, an organism is made up of cells. So what is a cell? A cell is a structure.
Yes.
Right? And you have the nucleus, you have the whatever, and the cell. Sometimes you might, in plants, you have the cell walls. In animals, you don't have the cell walls or whatever. Right? So that means you have, say, in some schools, a panel could have more complex structures within it.
Yes.
Right? So the same name, if you just call them a unit, then they seem to be the same thing. But if you say it's a structure, then the structure may, in some schools, already encompass within it some kind of mechanism.
Yes.
Say for example, the faculty. The faculty is not just a unit, it has a structure. We have, the faculty board, we have the different program committees, and we have, and there are decision-making sorts of regulations. So we have, say, for example, the centers. You see, when we had centers from the mid-1990s, but we only had the faculty only started trying to streamline and understand what centers are.
Yes.
I mean, there are all kinds of things. And so during the period 2000, we started the unitary faculty 2002, and then at that point, the dean with the associate deans decided that, well, we should have some uniformity in
Yes.
terms of the terms of reference.
Yes.
Okay, so when we talk about the structure, organizational structure, then it encompasses, if it exists. I mean, it may not exist.
Yes.
I mean, in some schools you might not even have a structure, you may not have a unit,
Yes.
but maybe in different schools they have the same thing called, say, the science panel. But the science panel might be very different from one school to another.
Yes.
So if you just refer to them as a unit, then it doesn't highlight the differences.
Okay.
Yeah.
So an organizational structure is an encompassing term, an umbrella term. Just like if grade 2 were an organizational structure, by understanding that it's a structure, we understand that there can be substructures as well.
It could have.
Yes, like classes. I mean, grade 2 in the school that I'm going to share with you shortly has 2 classes in each grade.
And also whether the structure has a function, right? I mean, according to your stories, then in some schools the unit is a unit. It doesn't do anything. But in some cases, the structure may actually serve a function. Just like say, if we say faculty board, it's not just a faculty board. It does something, right?
So, yes. Yeah. Okay. So the structure can encompass substructures, like meetings and certain kinds of roles, like teachers and students can be assigned to grade 2. Good. So, what are the organizational structures and the meetings, the roles, the physical infrastructure, and the interaction foci? This is a word I'm trying to work out alongside information flow. Is the information flow actually the interaction foci? What is the pyramid of number? So how do we actually construct from all of these structures a network between the structures? Well, can we trace the flow of information? Again, I'm using synonyms right now because I'm trying to standardize my terms. What kind of term I'm actually ultimately going to use? Interaction foci, the innovation, the information from one meeting to the next. For instance, before this meeting, I had a meeting with Nancy, and we were talking about my research, and we hatched some ideas on a piece of paper. And so we're going from one meeting with Nancy and me to another meeting with Nancy and me and you guys, and this is coming through. I'm about to share some of this with you. So in that way, tracing this kind of information, I believe, is how I can construct a pyramid of number. That's the term I'm using right now. Food chain was another word that I used. Yeah, I'm still working on
I don't know. I'm a little bit unsure about the word pyramid of numbers. I mean, the term pyramid of numbers. But you know, when you show wave a piece of paper, I think you actually are referring to a very important concept. artifacts,
Mm.
or in some people's term, it's called a reification,
Yes.
right? So the reification is important in carrying the information.
Yes.
So you're talking about information flow. So how do you carry the information flow? So
Yes.
does, say you were giving me the example of a school having no explicit school curriculum.
Yes.
So they don't have any reification
Yes.
for communicating curriculum concepts among teachers.
That's a good point.
So I think that is a very important concept.
Yes. So these ideas of private curriculum, well, in fact, there's no. It's
No
not
reification.
reification.
No artifacts to carry the
Yes.
information.
So if it was reified, it'd be public. Okay. Good. Thank you. So, reification is transitioning from private to public through artifacts, like my paper. Okay, and then
You know,
last.
I think maybe I'm not very clear now, but you were talking about this concept of pyramid of numbers, and I'm
Yes.
thinking about I don't know whether you were there when Terry Montemayor was here.
Yeah.
And he was talking about phase transitions,
Yes.
right? So I think maybe because when you talk about pyramid of numbers, basically you are looking at the predation
Yes.
and in a way also competition, model. I mean, that's one way you can still, talk about how different roles may be predating on other roles. But I think maybe an easier way to think about this, I mean, you might consider whether it would be, if we're looking at it from the change perspective, whether there is indication of some sustainability
Yes.
in change, is whether there is a phase transition.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
And the phase transition probably involves numbers, but rather than calling it, pyramid of numbers, which conjures up something else and then
Yes.
it's more complex, you might want to look at whether there are phase transitions in
Yes.
terms of the numbers of certain things, and it's easier.
Yes, and maybe I'll get to that when I try to talk about the key things
Yeah.
that I can contribute to the world. Okay, so I'm.
Phase transitions.
Yeah, some more slides. Phase transitions. I spent 2 years collecting data on several pedagogical technologists in private international schools in Hong Kong and Singapore. I've taken a very, very close look at 3 pedagogical technologists, and I'll share why I'm taking a very, very close look at these 3 right now. I'm studying a guy named Daniel, and Daniel works.
It's a fake name.
Yeah,
okay.
these are fake names. I've been using these fake names for so many years. So Daniel works at. Actually, let me start with Sam. Sam works in a private international school in Singapore. It's one of the largest, most famous, most expensive, and most prestigious private international schools in Singapore. It was recently awarded the Educational Technology School of the Year by a prominent educational technology community conference. And I chose that case of Sam, because in that school there are quite a number of highly specialized and highly integrated organizational structures, and roles and meetings such that information or innovation flows very easily. It's like just pop and drop. So you drop this, for example, I traced the flow of an iMovie innovation, and I traced the flow of learning journals, a new pedagogical innovation in the school, and we could see how quickly and easily it spread through all the grade levels and all the classes in the school. Then I chose another school, and this one is, her name's Scarlett, and she's in one of the smaller private international schools in Hong Kong. This school is so obscure that most people don't even know it exists. And this is actually the opposite end. It's very, very extreme, just like how Sam's school is extreme. This school has very few organizational structures. Basically, its only organizational structure is grade level. And even the grade level, besides lessons, they don't have meetings. So we don't have formal, regular meetings, for example, between teachers in grade levels and within grade level. They don't have other kinds of organizational structures like an ICT team. They don't have curriculum teams. They only actually have one curriculum team for a special language and culture curriculum. They don't have a professional development unit. So they do not have many structures. They also do not have many meetings. And they don't have many specialized roles. So we see a lot of, I trace, how would I say this? How would I describe this? Okay. So the information flow, there are three components of information flow. They're all correlated. They must exist together. This pedagogical technologist, Scarlett, is in the school to try to introduce iPads, wide-scale iPad deployment. Not only that, but in order to do that, she also must create a public curriculum. This school is very special. Her school is very special because before her arrival, they operated with a private curriculum. That is, there was no curriculum, standard curriculum, even between teachers at grade level. So there was a lot of individual decision making. There was very little corporate decision making and very little communication about curriculum for the pedagogical technologist. So not only is the pedagogical technologist there to induce the flow of iPads and public curriculum, but also, in line with all of these things, to get teachers to change their pedagogy or to make their pedagogy public. And then finally, I chose another school. This guy named Daniel. He works in one of the most prestigious, expensive, well-known private international schools in Hong Kong. And I chose this school because it's also very, very extreme. The information flow, there are organizational units and there are meetings, but the information flow, I trace the flow of an innovation, digital storytelling, through the school, and we see that the digital storytelling actually has very little impact on the school because of the types of meetings that digital storytelling passes through and the kinds of people at these meetings. So that ultimately digital storytelling does not become systemic in the school. It just passes in and out very easily in the school. Okay. Now, time to talk about the very, very difficult parts. how did I organize or analyze my data? I'm doing that right now, and it's difficult. Now I'm going to draw you some pictures. All right. Originally, when I started writing up my cases, this is Sam. I focused a lot on the meetings. I focused on, identified all of the meetings from the data. So iteration 1 for organizing and analyzing my data was by meetings. And I was like, okay, well, what are all of the meetings? And, hello. In terms of coevolution, the changes, the before and after, hello. And so I write a bit about all of these meetings. Where is it? Okay, here. I also, how can I say this? Okay. I identified all the meetings, and then I identified which meetings were created after the pedagogical technologist. So before the pedagogical technologist in the school, there are certain meetings. Hello. Okay. Like this. So before the pedagogical technologist is in the school, these meetings already exist in Sam's school. And then when he becomes the pedagogical technologist in the school, he takes part in creating these meetings, these additional meetings. So that was what I was really focused on, meetings, the qualities of meetings, the formation of meetings, and the information flow of meetings. But my conceptual framework is a lot more than meetings. The physical infrastructure part was something that Nancy just recently reminded me of. I didn't focus enough on the changing roles. I didn't focus enough on the changing organization units. I was pretty obsessed with meetings for a few months. And then I started to write a bit more about all of these units. So, for example, in Scarlett's case, I started breaking down, identifying organizational units, physical infrastructure, roles, and then I started to explain how they change before and during the pedagogical technologist. And now I've reached a third stage. So first I was obsessed about meetings. And then I became a bit more focused on org unit structures. Meetings, roles, physical infrastructure. And these are like my axial codes and information flow. Now, after the meeting with Nancy 2 hours ago, we have something new. And maybe this makes a bit more sense. And I want to go from here to here. So now I'm thinking to present my findings as a before and during and if possible and after. So before the pedagogical technologist in the school, what are the organizational structures? Hello. And then during, what happens, if anything? So for example, in the case of Scarlett, there were only, again, grade level organizational structures, and there was a curriculum organizational structure for one particular curriculum team. When she becomes a pedagogical technologist, there are no new organizational structures. meetings. I was focusing on that a lot before I came to this latest iteration. So I have a lot of information on analysis on the kinds of meetings that are created during the pedagogical technologies time. How are roles changing? This is very important. I actually haven't been focusing enough on how the PT role is changing. I've been focusing a lot on how the other roles are changing or not changing, but I actually haven't written up how the PT is actually changing.
Or maybe even not changing, but how this, I mean, in a way, I mean, we were talking about this earlier on. I mean, the PT is different from other people in the school, in that others, because it is, as you said, it's a new species, it's a new role.
Yes.
So it's unlike, say, for example, a principal, a panel head, a math teacher, or whatever. I mean, these are regular roles. So you can be employed in a school in a particular role without thinking that you need to be rocking the boat or changing anything.
Yes.
Now, usually, if you are going into the role of a school principal, that becomes a little bit different because you're expected to be the leader. But otherwise, I mean, a PT usually doesn't have a very high status, right? But then that PT is expected to change something in the school.
Yes.
And so what actually is the role? It's actually, because if this pedagogical technologies is actually working at all, making any impact,
Yes.
then most likely the role has to be changing. And it's actually very much through the interaction based on what you told me.
Yes.
So that's very interesting.
Yes. As you were talking about status, that triggered my mind because in Sam's case, in that school in Singapore, he actually worked very hard to increase his profile and status, even his remuneration. He worked very hard to actually get a pay raise. So he was trying to raise his profile. I think about Sam too, and I think about some of the outward changes to the PT role, because he had been in there for 2 years now, and in the first year he had no teaching load at all. But in the second year, he fought very hard to actually have a nominal teaching load, teach 2 lessons a week. And he felt that was very, very important to establish his credibility with teachers. I think about Scarlett in this other school, this small, obscure private international school, and how her role was changing too. Because the school lacks organizational units, because the school lacks public curriculum. In order to push all of these things through, public curriculum, iPads, and changing teacher pedagogy, she must do a lot of things, generally with the principal. That includes writing policies, developing performance appraisal systems, developing professional development systems, developing ICT usage policies, delivering all of these things. So her role was evolving too, the more she discovered what wasn't there. She had to figure out what she had to do. And then her role was changing too, the more she got in conflict with certain teachers or certain roles. She knew that she couldn't necessarily work there, but she had to go here and direct her energies. Okay, something that's pretty straightforward is physical infrastructure. And with the technology comes changing physical infrastructure. And in some schools, it's easier to change the physical infrastructure than others. Okay, so that's how I'm going to rewrite my things now.
I have some further suggestions.
Yes.
Now, you were talking about, we were talking about the reification.
Yes.
I think the reification should be included in the before-after, right?
So,
The reification.
reification.
I mean, before and after. Say, for example, before there was no curriculum, public school curriculum, but then
Yeah.
after there is, or whatever.
Yeah.
So what kind of reification was there before, after?
Yes.
And then also, in relation to meetings, I still think that you need to differentiate between mechanisms
Yes.
and meetings. Mechanisms being a kind of more like a formal thing. Say,
Yes.
for example, we do have, say, faculty board meetings as a
Yes.
mechanism.
Yes, agreed.
But when and how we actually do it is another thing. So I think when you talk about before and after, I think it's very good because then you actually look at change.
Yeah.
What has changed? But then the meetings that you actually analyze were actually analyzing the interactions.
Yes.
The meetings were the interactions.
Okay.
So interactions are not the same as the mechanism.
Mechanisms could be purposed, formalized, formal meetings. Not all meetings are mechanisms. Mechanisms are meetings.
Exactly. So mechanisms are formalized ways for people to interact, right? Now, of course, I mean, we could have a dean who basically do not hold any faculty board meetings. That's another thing,
Yes.
right? But there is such a mechanism. And then, of course, you could have meetings without those mechanisms.
Yes.
You could have ad hoc meetings.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess in my analysis, I call those kinds of non-mechanism meetings informal meetings.
Yeah. And then, if you have, I'm just still thinking about your analysis.
Yes.
Say, if you have your pre and post,
Yes.
okay, in terms of the change,
Yes.
then you would then naturally ask, what brought about those changes? And then your flow, the information flow or the interactions, then you can it then makes more meaning for you to focus on. You were talking about, you were trying to analyze or understand what we were talking about in terms of the foci
Yes.
of the interactions.
Yes.
Because the foci of the interaction should be closely linked to the changes.
Mm.
And of course, I mean, when
Yes.
at one point we were talking very much about the conflicts.
Yes.
And conflicts are also very much about the foci, which is linked to the changes. So if one of the change is a reification, then it makes sense,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's something I forgot to point out. It is very curious that in the case of Scarlett in that obscure private international school, and in the case of Sam in that large and prestigious private international school in Singapore, there was a boatload of conflict. But the weird thing is that I was following Daniel in this large and prestigious private international school in Hong Kong for several years, and there was never any mention of conflict or tension at all. That was very, very meaningful.
And was there any change?
No. And that goes back to the nature of these kinds of meetings,
Yes.
because
So
they
you
work
see,
mechanisms.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It actually, I now recall you were saying, talking about Daniel.
Yeah.
Did he produce any? I mean, did his work in the school produce changes? Now, if we talk about whether there are any teachers who actually adopted some of the things he promoted, the answer is yes.
Yes.
Right? But you were saying, well, there is no sustainability,
Yes.
right? And so then this framework of looking at changes
Mm.
before and after becomes very meaningful, very
Yes.
helpful in differentiating. So why are you saying that Daniel makes no change? Because he does influence some teachers. But when we are really talking about change in a sustainable sense, in terms of a phase change, then that becomes meaningful.
Yes, and a very good example is when he was finally able to take digital storytelling into a lesson. But the lesson itself is not a mechanism. It was just a meeting. And this is the important part. The panel head was in that lesson along with several other stakeholders voluntarily observing, and the panel head told me, this is great. It would be really, really cool if Daniel could share this with all the teachers in the curriculum, in the subject area. But that never happened.
Why?
Because there was no meeting. There was actually no mechanism. So Daniel did not attend, for instance, now this is supposing they actually have a panel head meeting.
Yeah.
Now, one, do they have a panel head meeting? But two, Daniel was not at that meeting. So there was no follow-up. So the meeting did not transition into a mechanism. And that's why the thing just so easily also passed out of the lesson. Okay. So I want to show you one final slide, and this is something that I've been thinking about as I think about complex adaptive systems, and I was so obsessed about meetings, and I was focusing on roles. I was just running one night and just kind of had this picture in my head about some of the important units in my school ecology, and how are they related? What are some of the things that I see? And can we actually have, like, we call these in phase transitions? Can we go from, for example, Sadanka and I just talking in the common room to organizing this kind of meeting, and then organizing another meeting here, and then inviting more people, a select group of people? Is there some kind of hierarchy or order to meetings, from meetings becoming meetings to perhaps mechanisms? So maybe I'm trying to articulate the difference between like a meeting and a mechanism. And I was also just thinking about schools and roles and changes to roles. And at the very bottom, we can't have a school without teachers and students. And then we have other kinds of roles that they don't necessarily need to be there. For example, the school with orphans doesn't necessarily have parents. But then, as we have technological change, we have more emergent hybrid roles. So we have the PT and other kinds of PT type roles. So just trying to put all of these ideas together.
I think this is a little bit more removed. It's more like, the later stage, you're trying to build up a theory, like any would. So I think it might be a bit too early.
Yes.
So leave it there as something that you might want to dream about, but I think maybe we can't really go deeper into it.
I agree. But that flow chart was the kind of same thing I'm trying to get at, an algorithm. Can we break down a complex adaptive system into some kind of predictive model based on simple rules? I do not know. But that's.
Yeah, I think if you can go on this first, that would be very helpful.
Cool. Thank you.
Any questions? Any comments? Anything for David? Patrick, you've been thinking very much about complex systems as well.
Because you focus quite a lot on the formal meetings and the formal mechanisms. In my previous studies, and we find that some informal things are very influential.
Yes.
How can you capture that?
I capture it when these PTs talk about it, and when I observe it. Something that's very cool and curious is that Daniel and his school operates largely through these informal, spontaneous meetings that aren't mechanisms. Sam, on the other hand, at UWCSEA does not operate on that level. He does not operate in the informal. He does not operate in the spontaneous. He operates through mechanisms and creating mechanisms.
Well, I think it's not exactly true that he doesn't operate informally at all.
Yes.
But his preference was not to use the informal.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
Right?
Good.
That's what I heard from you.
Yes. 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 Okay. And the same goes for Scarlett too. She does not prefer these kinds of informal. She wants to build structures.
A little bit before I read paper, paper name, the decision making, some of the terms related to decision making, thinking about where these teams, they have decision making on the level of curriculum or the leadership or what level, but
Yes.
teamwork decision making helped me to think about the actual participation and design participation,
Yes.
both in school level and teacher level and the technician level. That could be helpful as later to think about their participation in their design participation, but actual participation, but participation in the teacher level. That's more than
Yes.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So yeah, I agree because I mean, if it's only informal, you can't really have ways to make formal decisions
Yes.
and make them hold.
Yes.
So
Agreed.
informal meetings could be useful for initial stimulation, testing the water,
Yes.
or whatever,
Yes.
building relationships. But
Yes.
if you really want to make change, that's not adequate. And if you spend too much of your time on informal mechanisms, you might actually be wasting your time.
I agree. Going back to the idea of Daniel and the impotence, ultimately the unsustainability of innovation has a lot to do with the informal nature of his meetings, but also his actual role had no authority. But as I was saying before of Sam, he worked very, very hard to raise his profile. He also has a strong preference for mechanisms and being involved in all the big meetings where all the big players are.
But actually, if you think about, the PT in the small school that you
Yes.
mentioned, I forgot her name,
Yes.
but she was, the kind of things that she was doing, she was trying to write the curriculum document, the
Yes.
policy on this,
Yes.
and so on. So all of those things are in fact pretty high level things.
Yes.
Right? And in fact, I mean, my hunch is, whatever area of change you're looking at, if you don't actually have impact at those levels,
Yes.
you can't really make succeed in change. So whether it be gifted education or e-learning.
Yes.
So that becomes quite interesting. So I think this kind of framework would be very useful.
Yes. And that's actually kind of ironic because Scarlett herself said she had no impact and she didn't want to do these kinds of things. She said she was not the ICT curriculum leader, but in fact she was the de facto leader. She was the de facto professional development giver and supplier, and she didn't think any of her changes would be sustainable. But ultimately she found a replacement, and the iPad infrastructure is in all the grade levels and they have a public curriculum now. That's very, very curious.
Okay, so
Thank you.
let's have a final one very quickly.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Annie. You are making me curious completely about my experience doing the data collection.
Have you heard the activity theory?
Yes.
Yeah, I find it's really helpful for us to identify those behaviors under theory. Even we don't write the theory, but there was something similar things that the human activity or are, I mean, illustrated by some theories, but
Yes.
those terms may help us to categorize those behaviors.
Agreed.
Um,
I will review. I have not read about activity theory in 20 years.
I'm studying the
Alright, let me write that down.